Gregory Unleashed on the Blaze.
So mainly, where are you now? After having written Inconvenient Facts, is there a website that people can find you at? And
yeah, I've been in a little bit of transition. I've actually, my mission is to get the science and the facts that's actually happening about climate change out there. Mm-hmm. And part of this, I recently took over as executive director for the CO2 Coalition in Arlington, Virginia. And I'm leading, this is a group of scientists, 70 of some of the top scientists in the world.
70?
70 top scientists.
Okay. What about the consensus that everybody believes it's catastrophic and happening right now?
Yeah, well, these guys, the people like Dr. Richard Lindzen, atmospheric physicist out of MIT. Our chair is Will Happer, atmospheric physicist out of Princeton. We've got Dr. Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace. All of these people sit on our board, and we're fighting this. And again, this group, we stick to the science and try and stay out of the politics.
That's hard to do.
And it is hard to do in this subject. We want to rise above it and provide the actual true science out there. And it's great working with these people. And so we're using that as a new platform to get this information. Really, it's a positive message of an Earth that's thriving and prospering, and humanity's benefiting from the changes we see in climate change. It's stark. By almost every metric we look at, we see the Earth's ecosystems thriving and prospering. And it's completely, your listeners are going, what? They've never heard that before. Maybe they had if they've heard me or when you've had another guest on. But it's really, I call it the biggest untold story of the late 20th and early 21st century. It's this Earth that's thriving and prospering. And because we can look at it, the Earth is greening. In other words, vegetation's increasing. Up to 50% of the Earth's surface has an increase in vegetation. Less than 4% of the Earth's surface is what they call browning or desertific. In other words, it's vegetation's deep. That's a great trade-off. That's a great trade-off.
I would think so, yeah.
I take that any day of the week. And that's exemplified by what we talked about earlier with is crop growth, which is exploding. Another good thing.
Meanwhile, the alarmists are always saying the opposite, that the Earth is in catastrophic failure, where there's drought and fires and hurricanes and tornadoes like the world has never seen before. And every single year, come what may, they tell you it was the hottest year we've ever experienced. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, well, they're using anything that goes bad, any catastrophe, they're tying it to climate change. We just saw that in the condo collapse. Jennifer Granholm.
That's climate change.
Yeah, it was Jennifer Granholm, Energy Secretary, blamed it on climate change. And it's patently false. That is just not true. I mean, I looked at Miami's sea level rise record. The sea level is rising today at the same rate it was 120 years ago. There's been no increase, no acceleration due to any man-made influences. And is last year or the last decade warmer than the year warmer in history? Well, if your history only goes back to 1800 or 1850 or 1900, that would be true. Because if remember we say we're warming, well, so the most recent temperatures would be higher. But if we put this in a long-term perspective, that's just not true. We saw 3 other great warming periods over the last 4,000 or 5,000 years that were warmer than today. And remember, too, they say, oh, my God, we can't let it get 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees warmer, or we're going to have crop failure. Plants are going to die, and we're all going to die, and famine. Well, what happened? What happened in the past over the last 5,000 years when it did get that warm? I'll tell you what happened. Civilizations rose up. Great empires arose. There was a reason the Romans wore togas. It was really warm. And that was a time of great prosperity. Yeah. And it was much warmer. We know for a fact it was much warmer then than today. And the fact of the matter is, it was the cooling periods between each of these warm periods that were horrific. They were catastrophic. And what we found when it started cooling consistently, we saw crop failure, famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation. It's a completely opposite of what we're being told. We're being told that we're going to die because it's getting too warm. History, if we look back through climate history and human history, just the opposite has occurred.
Do you have a hard time getting on say CNN or shows where, they'd be more confrontational.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that call. No, and in fact...
they don't want to talk about it, do they? They don't want the truth to be told.
Yeah, and in fact, in that CNN interview, they had their content provider, whatever her title, I forget what her title is. She was on, she stated that we need to tie everything we can to climate change, and we don't need to interview any experts. And so and she stated that, and they don't want us. They need to silence people like me and the scientists of the CO2 Coalition. Forget that they don't want us to get our message out there. And I'll tell you what, I'm an optimist. I think that the great population that we see here in the United States, I think there's an overwhelming percentage that have great skepticism and doubt about this link between man-made warming and catastrophism. Just about every random person I talk to are just thirsty for this information. The information that's in the book and on the smartphone app, they're thirsty for it when I talk to them about it, and they accept it. And it just I think they're overreaching with this, Pat. And I think when they're tying condo collapses to climate change, I mean, that's an overreach.
Yeah, and they're contradicting themselves. They used to continually say, when we would say, look, it's 35 below zero this week in Havre, Montana. Well, don't confuse weather with climate. But now they do the exact same thing every summer. Every summer. Exactly.
And nobody would know it, but South America, in the southern hemisphere, just experienced a tremendous cold. It's their winter now, and it's our summer here. They had a huge cold snap that was as much as 20 degrees. They broke records most over South America and up into Central America. But again, when I looked at that, it was being blamed on climate change. So this huge cold snap across South America, the cold snap in France earlier this year, again, it destroyed maybe 80% of the French wine crops. And it was blamed on climate change.
It's pretty hard to win this discussion when the other side claims victory no matter what happens. When they're on both sides of the issue, and both extremes are due to climate change. Well, how do you argue with that? What do you do with that?
Yeah. I think you throw it up, you make fun of them when we can, and it's pretty easy to do. And they don't have much of a sense of humor.
No,
I can tell you that.
No,
that's for sure.
And more long-term, I think this ties back to an earlier conversation we had here on the program, is you homeschool. And you make sure that your kids aren't taught this propaganda on a daily basis. And I think the tweet that came in earlier spoke volumes when we showed the Pride Month calendar of things they're doing in that classroom. Oh, I missed the simpler times when we just indoctrinated our kids on climate change.
Yeah, we've got at the CO2 Coalition, we've just launched an initiative about that, to deal with that, an education initiative.
And that's excellent. That's what we need.
We do. We realize it's going to be a tough road to hoe and probably can't get into the public schools, but we can target our message, put out a science-based message to the homeschoolers.
Oh, keep us updated on that.
And
that's great.
I think there's a great market for that. We're creating our first video. We're teaming up with a group out of Brazil called Intelectos. It's a similar science-based group down there. They're trying to get the message out about the rainforest and what's actually happening in the rainforest. The woman we work with there,
which is,
you can't burn a rainforest. All right. Okay. There's a reason it's called the rainforest, because it's really wet.
It rains.
Right.
Yeah.
You can cut it down and then burn it. All right. But and most of the fires that we see down in the so-called rainforest are really grasslands that they burn off every year, and it's part of the things they've been doing for decades, actually hundreds of years down there. So it's pretty funny. She just laughs about it.
And what was that, 2-3 years ago when they had the big fires that were happening in and near the rainforest, and they claimed that 20% of the world's oxygen came from the rainforest.
Well, that's a good story if you're on their side, but it's just not true.
It's just not true.
It's just not true, and that's what they're talking about. Their scientists have looked into that, and it's really, if anything, it's probably a net sink In other words, there's probably a negative effect that the trees are actually sucking up more, and the forest there is actually a negative, slightly, but not much. But it's certainly not, as it's being presented, as the lungs of the world is what they were calling it.
Yes,
and that was the terminology, lungs of the world.
Hey, as you guys develop at the CO2 Coalition this kind of educational materials to combat this kind of climate nonsense propaganda, please make sure that you keep me in the loop on that, because I know that this audience will eat that up.
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to come back. I'm going to hold you to that, because we've got some really excited, really smart people that are working on this.
That'd be great.
And you guys could help us get that out there.
We'd love to. We really would. Meantime, where can people get what is the app called? And they can get it pretty much anywhere now, right?
Yeah, Google Play, App Store. Search for
Back on Apple.
Right. Search for Inconvenient Facts. Everybody listening.
And again, it's got all kinds of facts that you can refute the nonsense coming from the other side.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And you can go to inconvenientfacts.xyz to learn more about me and the book.
Okay.
But my main gig right now is the CO2 Coalition, which you can learn at co2coalition.org. If you're looking to do something, we take donations. I want to get our message out there at the
Thanks,
CO2
Gregory. Next, see you on the Glenn Beck program.
Support for this podcast comes from Yield Street. Bring your portfolio to the future